This building is not on site, even though the foundations are in, basically because the cost of the structure is complicated by the fact that it looks like if it was taller than it is. As a matter of fact, KPF were very good friends of mine, I should say. Have a building which is exactly like this in Qatar, which is also a spiral, which is twice the height of this one. So there is this whole thing about the level of originality or how you sell it, how many people are really aware of what architecture is doing nowadays. I mean, we all know, we are all bombarded by the publications and so on. So it wasn't really like a knockoff, if you will, something that, but it was really not of the same nature of formal innovation, if not functional innovation, that this building has. The most interesting thing is that all of these buildings have the shape of being extremely tall buildings, and they are an average of 40 to 50 stories buildings. Some buildings in Manhattan in the 40s and 30s, people would build just as a box and don't be concerned about any problem with the lateral resistance, wind forces, and so on. So all of these buildings try to make something out of something which is not really very demonstrable. It has this type of effect, and it really ends up in rooms that are this wide for a good 6 to 8 stories at the top of it, which were meant to be designed for law offices of very prestigious levels and so on. And it has these terraces that make it look probably more like a hotel than a building. It doesn't have a hotel. All of this is building structure. It has at the bottom this type of effect. I mean, the skin of the building opens as if it was a skirt and covers a quarter of the plaza. And at the time in which these things were priced out, I mean, these things were common merchandise. I mean, most of the people would not really be concerned about the cost of any of these structures, and ultimately the claim for contributions to the public realm are reduced to essentially what you can see here, which is a through block arcade, right? I mean, something that filters through the building and actually generates potentially a shortcut on an area which is totally full of shortcuts, because it's a typical medieval grid. Somebody has to tell me if this is going to be short or long, because it's good. I think.
You get plenty of time.
What is it?
What time is it?
It's 3:30.
How much time is it?
Huh? Take an hour if you want.
Okay. So as you can see here, this is basically how the spaces work in the grid of the city, and these are some of the impacts of the typical floor plates. This is where what I call the hotel starts, right? And this is the typical plan that you get in a site like this with a core of this dimension. The Leighton Hall building is also the result of, this is by Richard Rogers, it's also the result of this sort of completely perverse combination between the difficulties of dealing with the preservationists and how you deliver a plan that is actually viable. It is located, so the pinnacle will be located here. This is the only reference that we have as a built tower of a relatively new pedigree. And this is the building that Richard did. And as he always does, has a lateral core that it is pulled on the side, which is this element here, where you can see all the elevators and the stairs and the air conditioning ducts and all the rest of it, serving this, which in a very typical British way it has also a nickname, and this is called the cheese grater. That wouldn't be a problem other than the fact that the biggest plan is barely 1,600 square feet, and the top, at this, by the time that you reduce the core, the areas at the top of the building are so small and so expensive because they're located up above that that made them, in order to kind of return the investment, almost 20 or 25% outside of the market rate, which is unbelievably high. I mean, these buildings here are leased at £200 a foot, compared to 90, say, 9 West 57th Street, which is the most prestigious building in Manhattan. It's 120. This is £200, which is $400, right? And people still pay for that. Well, again, the way in which you negotiate the permit is by saying that this, in which you can see it here more integrated, the cluster now being more materialized, at least in this computer rendering. The process of approval was determined by a view which happens to be the processional view of the Queen when she goes to one particular event a year at St. Paul's Cathedral. And that particular event has something, I don't know the name, but it's something like the Veterans Day. I mean, it is the day in which everybody died, apparently. And so she takes this carriage and sort of walks on Fleet Street. And when she's walking on Fleet Street, you're not supposed to see anything other than the dome of it's not St. Peter's, right? It's St. Paul's. Sorry. And so then when you stand in Fleet Street and you look at it, you see many more things than just the dome of St. Paul's. And among the things you see are not only buildings but also signs and things. And so you start wondering, where is the basic fundamental argument about the purity of the dome? But what happened is that because that particular point, and it is a curve where the view is the clearest, the funnel of the street walls, the original medieval space, define a visual plane that has exactly the inclination of the cheese grater. And so essentially what happens is that the building took the form of that particular view. And made literally, again, around 35% of the building, there's nothing from here to here in the building. There is very little from here to here, and probably impossible to lease spaces up to here. And this is not something that I'm saying with any kind of malice. I mean, you talk to the agents, and that's what is happening. It's just that they're practically impossible to lease, right? The second aspect of these buildings and this discussion, one that is very laudable, I think, is this notion that you have to have a contribution of the building to the public realm. In the Gherkin is the top of the building, which is one of the most wonderful rooms in the world, I think. It's absolutely fantastic. I mean, it's the top of the Pineapple, say, and it's literally half the size of this room. And you go up there and have a drink for 120 pounds. And that's supposed to be the contribution to the public realm. In the cheese crater, what it is that Richard lifted off the whole building, and he really did lift it off. I mean, it's sort of like approximately 150 feet above grade, and liberated all the plant in the back. And now that's something that, unfortunately, I thought I had a picture of this, that created this second pipe dream, which is that, there's a limit for how many bars and restaurants can you put in a building, right? But people keep saying, no, this is great because it's going to be a restaurant A, restaurant B, and so on, and they never happen, and so those enormous spaces remain untouched. Minerva is done by Nick Grimshaw, who you all know, and it's also a plan that it is again a combination of triangles, in which the building always presents itself almost like you all know the Hancock building, the building that I am and Harry Cobb designed back in the 80s, which I think is an absolutely spectacular building, in which this effect occurs only on certain views, but the plan isn't really a triangular plan. It's a parallelogram that has been shifted, right? So it has an angle that allows you to see this magical sort of planar condition, but not necessarily an unusable plan. And then you can see here that the three volumes are separated into three triangles, which made the plan also extremely difficult to move. The Heron Tower, which is also KPF, is a series of, is that building there, is again a knockoff of the Gherkin, because it has this notion of the so-called neighborhoods, and again one of these sort of incredible forays into social engineer that our profession has. I mean, that you define a notion, right? So that you have X number of square feet of office space, and then you intersect into that notion, which requires flexibility, so you can lease it to a tenant A or tenant B and so on. And you say, no, what I'm going to introduce is this notion that within this enormous amount of space, there are going to be neighborhoods. And the neighborhoods have an atrium, and the atriums escalate themselves in the building, pretty much like the Gherkin, but in a much less imaginative way, by making it equally difficult to lease anyway, because you're sharing something with a guy that may or may not pay his rent almost, right? It's also a building, as I say, that tries to create this effect of the long view and so on. And the verticality of it, and these are the atriums that you can see take 3 stories and break the plan in that. Just a quick view on this building, which and this is for another conversation, but it's also a moment in the office's sort of approach to these things, which actually coincides with, in my view, somewhat the retreat of Normans from the actual day-to-day operation. Yes, it is his work, is pretty much his job, but it is sort of the kind of thing that I have a great deal of doubt that he would actually allow to happen if he was on top of it. But it is a relatively small space, as you can see. This is the fattest part of the tower, and this is a person, and from here to here, all of this is core, right? Now, the top space, as you can see here, is one of these absolutely extraordinary feast of engineering that he did with this unbelievable guy that one of these days you need to bring here, Jörg Schleich from Hamburg, who's a fantastic engineer. And it has this, oculus at the top, and is supported by essentially the sash system. But this is the plan. I don't know if you see it in proportion, but you see these are the atriums that start sliding like this. And then if you happen to have a unit that it is, say, that requires this area, they have to go through this, color condition. And it is just impossible to imagine that anybody, as I say, other than architects, would actually use this space. Right? Broadgate is another building that could not be built today because it was built over a platform of an offspring of one of the railroad tracks coming into the main station to the west of the city. So it's an enormous, this is literally like the Hancock building. But the important thing is that it's cantilevered over the railroad tracks, and you can see in here again to the extent that you can actually produce a good ratio of frontage, that is private offices in here, or what they call the mini trading floors, which are just basically operators sitting in computers one next to the other. This is the building that it is probably the one that is the most logical. It needed a setback in here at the top, and the plans are very good and very comfortable. And this is definitely by Foster, and it has these things about breaking it. In comparison with any of the other buildings, this building built in New York today would merit a great deal of publicity. In London at that time, at the beginning of this decade, I mean, this was like a bomb. I mean, it was sort of considered to be a blah building, something that with no interest at all, which I don't think is really a fair judgment of it. And that's what you see from the terraces, which are well used. Now, only in comparison with this is another thing that it is really quite remarkable, which is this building. The city ends in this edge, as you can see here, and this is the poor man's territory, and now it's not anymore. But in that site, an Italian developer with essentially no money came to town, and in the midst of this, complete craze, he hired Renzo to make this building. This building is called a Shard, and it is the tallest building in Europe, and it's under construction. Of course, the guy ran out of money. The building was took over by an intermediary that ended up selling it to Qatar too. So Qatar owns this and Canary Wharf, and independently a number of other projects in the city. The only curiosity here, just a brief note on the planning process, is that this is the actual city. This is the castle, the original castle. This is where the tower is. I mean, the whole thing historically for the UK is concentrated in this site. And the whole idea was that from this site you're not supposed to see anything, but of course you see all of that. And it was deemed that even though you would see it from here, it was located far enough such that whatever the magnetic effect of this form would take in the experience of reconstructing the environment of the 12th century, so that this wasn't going to be an impediment. Now, you can have lawyers tell you almost anything you want, right? Part of this period of the rounding effect is in Foster's office is this building, which is also unusable, which is the City Hall. So this building is under construction, and as you can see literally from this point on, this hat, I mean, it looks like a bishop somehow. This thing is nothing. It's just nothing. It is supposed to be residential up to this point, commercial here, and it has a hotel in between. It's really impressive shape, no question about it. So I wanted to tell you what happened to us, because it was an interesting exercise. We were incredibly lucky in participating practically a couple of years after I landed in London without any jobs or trying to see what would happen, for competition for this site, which is a very important site overlooking the river, where there is a building that has been demolished over the last year or so. And the site is this, the Gherkin is here, the city is here, the castle, right? And the site is this side. And this is called Fenchurch. And it's totally surrounded by very important monuments. Leighton Hall is supposed to happen in this side, Minerva, which is this tall building, is supposed to happen in this area. And if you look at the area of influence, and this is another curiosity, is that in this competition, the client was assuming that the building had to be, again, a tall building. There's no doubt that it's just basically maximizing the area of the site. Everything indicated that this building didn't participate in what it was called the cluster, because this is Peter Rees, had drawn a line in pencil in the map, right? And then all the lawyers poured into this drawing to figure out whether it was intentional or not, and it was literally just a circle. It says the cluster is more or less here. And the drawing of the cluster went right before the site. So this site was off the cluster. And at that time, we figured, what the heck, maybe nobody really know where the graphite of the pencil was, and maybe we can actually do a tall building. This is the building that got demolished. You remember more or less the site, and the river is basically here, so it is in the forefront towards the site, very, very visible from the castle, and a building of the 60s, which, by the way, I really thought that it was quite impressive, because it's the first structure that was built with a slip form to the top and hang down from it. And Fenchurch makes this curve in here, and all the lateral streets are very much determined by the medieval grid. As you can see here, it's all about this type of geometries, right? So I felt that in the competition, because it was a limited competition, that we had to be able to be relatively judicious. And so instead of making one scheme, we did 3 schemes. We did a wacky scheme, we did a not so wacky scheme, and we did a scheme that I thought that was going to win, because it gave you this huge floor plan, and simple, and American standards, good elevator, and great environmental design, and so on. And these competitions are judged basically by the client, with a number of another breed of people that have emerged in the UK, who are either former architects or people that are interested in architecture that have become advisors to the client. So you've got to explain to them what you want to do, and then they actually, say something, and ultimately the developer, like Mr. Tauman, decides where I go this way. This is for a company which is the largest and oldest real estate company in the UK. It's called Land Securities. It has 18 billion pounds of property in the city alone. It's an enormous conglomerate that provides services and everything, but it happens to be managed by professional people, right? Which bring to it the professionality, but nobody has a buck in the place, right? So it's sort of, and there were 2 guys in the competition. One was the bad cop, and the other one was the good cop. And the good cop was the one that said, because when I started working, I said, well, where is the code? There is no code. Where is the zoning resolution? There is no zoning resolution. So how large does this building have to be? They said, whatever you want. And I said, okay, so then, tell me how much money you pay for the land, so I somehow can figure out how many square meters or square feet you need in order to pay for the land and make, 15, 18, 20%. At that time, the expectations of the yield in a project like this were more like 30%. All proven, which I always think is only cocaine that gives you that. Unless you're Mr. Todd. I had this I had this idea that said, okay, so since I don't know anything, why don't I do 3 schemes, and then I show them, and we see, and they love this thing because they thought that it was a logical approach, and the 3 schemes had some virtue. One was that because there is a very important Christopher Wren church in here, that the building really started again in reverse, that had a top that was heavy at the bottom and in order to clear the view to the church. The second one was one in which that condition was sort of less obvious. And the third one was this tower, which I always thought that it contained an interesting idea, which is that in England, everybody's sort of doing buildings that look like this, saying that it is a high-rise. But if you lived in New York and you call a 45-story building a high-rise, you're close to being a jerk, because it's actually not a tower, right? So I said, and this is completely true, I said, well, I mean, these guys are, and I said this thing to Peter, I said, you guys don't have towers, I mean, you have mid-rise buildings, so since we know technology, why don't you just do it like this, and put the highest amount of area at the top of the building so you can lease it better and generate a greater return, rather than torturing that thing like all of these other precedents that we had. And then we went completely ballistic and did even bigger. Now, this was an interesting situation because, you know, for the moment from this scheme to this scheme was a conversation with the Labour mayor at the time that was completely in favor of blowing the joint, right? I mean, you know, this is modern times, we don't care about history, we're just going to do whatever we want. Just, how come it's not taller than yours? And we say, well, then I say, okay, so it could be taller. And then I showed this, which was another sort of semi-normal approach to the problem. And then these are all kind of versions of this. Now, I want to explain to you how the building concept was generated. Because the one thing I thought that it was absolutely fundamental, this is a sort of like a micro movie, so I gotta say a couple of words before. I wanted the building to be not only doing that, as opposed to this pseudo-structural profile, but I also wanted the building to be completely site-specific. In other words, that you could not take, I mean, it's clear to almost anybody that you can take the Gherkin and put it in White Plains or in Hong Kong, and it's always the Gherkin, right? I mean, you can put it anywhere. I thought that, you know, this place is so peculiar that it had to have some way that if it was somewhere else, you couldn't explain it. Not that it needed explanation or that anybody would ask you for it, but that it would be internally, say, intellectually, something that would give me some peace of mind. So the idea was this, that there is a cliff, the natural cliff, and that you can do this building, but I wanted to do this building, so you free up the base, and the geometry is generated basically by the curvature of the streets. And then, since we were outside of the, I need to go back to this and show you this thing again. Since I had in mind 2 other things. One is this important contribution that the building ought to make to the city in which it establishes, and that somehow all of these peaks and all of these little rooms where Coca-Cola costs £100 and so on, you know, we're really counterintuitive. That, you know, that's not public space, that's the most exclusive space there is. And that somehow, if I could regenerate the empty site at the top of the building and make it into a winter garden for people to come and look at the view, that it is so stunning from any higher point in London, because it's really like a mall. I mean, you can spend the rest of your week looking down and recognizing places and seeing a city that in plan is absolutely phenomenal.